Apocalypses, the end times, are an immensely popular narrative setting across all forms of media, really. In film and television, we have The Walking Dead, A Quiet Place, Resident Evil, The Last of Us, but no form of media seems as obsessed with the apocalypse as video games, where we also have The Walking Dead, A Quiet Place, Resident Evil, and The Last of Us, funnily enough. I want to talk to you about our partner, Instant Gaming. Do you like video games? Do you like saving money? Then, boy, do I have the site for you. Instant Gaming allows you to buy digital games at seriously reduced prices. Not only that, but with 24/7 customer support and over 750,000 reviews on Trustpilot with an average rating of 4.7 out of 5, you can rest assured knowing that with Instant Gaming, you're in safe hands. You see, this isn't another one of those shady game key marketplaces. Instant Gaming sources their keys direct from authorized resellers. Why pay more for the same video games? Save yourself some cash and support the channel by checking out Instant Gaming at the link in the description. If we're going to talk about the apocalypse and specifically different uses of the apocalypse within video games, I need to establish what I'm classing as an apocalypse. All the examples I just mentioned are of the zombie/infection based variety, but that's not all I want to talk about. By apocalypse, I quite literally mean the end of the world, in any capacity, the crumbling of a society and its laws and rules. For example, under my definition, I would count Death Stranding as an apocalypse game. Civilization still exists, of course, but society has collapsed. It's fragmented and needs reconnected. Let's start there. In 2019, Hideo Kojima released his first Kojima Productions game as an independent studio. Free from the shackles of corporate oversight with Death Stranding, Kojima was able to create something entirely different and personal. A game predominantly played by simply traversing a beautiful world and delivering packages. A mailman simulator, if you will. Except Death Stranding is far more than simply a mailman simulator. For one, while its world might be beautiful, it's also empty. Like I said before, civilization does still exist, but the people, they're hiding. Outside of cutscenes, most of your interactions with other people are virtual. Holograms. Society, normalcy, has collapsed. It needs reconnecting. And that is the weight you, the player, Sam, hold on your shoulders. You see, the packages you're delivering are not simply Switch 2 pre-orders or something like that. You are literally delivering the means of reconnection. There's so much to be said about the loneliness of being Sam Porter Bridges. In fact, there's a huge and interesting and vast discussion to be had about Sam Porter Bridges and the way that character is almost prophetically representative of the couriers who kept the world in motion throughout the COVID-19 lockdowns, delivering food, medicines, and necessities in a world that must have seemed so empty. That's an important topic, and one I might go into further on another day, but as much as there is to say about how Death Stranding's overwhelming sense of loneliness and its impact on the player and how it's somehow prophetically related to a pandemic that came a year after it, there's also something to be said for how that same loneliness and that weight on your shoulders makes you care so deeply about something as novel as the boxes you carry on your back. The gameplay of Death Stranding, the constant juggle of manually shifting your weight with L2 and R2 to stabilize yourself and avoid damaging the packages you're delivering, well, that simply wouldn't work without caring about them. The game knows that too, but it needs you to know that, and quickly. In one of the first missions of the game, you're tasked with your first solo traversal mission with the full gameplay loop in play, carrying your dead mother's corpse on your back through the ruined and empty landscapes to be incinerated. Immediately, you're forced to learn the game's mechanics, carrying the literal embodiment of emotional weight. You learn to care about what's on your back, and every stutter, slip, and fall fills your heart with a sense of dread that can only be experienced, not described. Despite the corpse of your mother being admittedly a very big thing, a heavy weight, carrying it only makes you care more for the littler things. The weather, the mud, the water, each jagged edge of a rock in this world becomes so important. The smaller packages then begin to weigh just the same emotionally, as though filled with all the responsibility and purpose and hope this world has left in it. What I'm trying to say is that something I take away from Death Stranding's vision of the end of the world is that in the face of such adversity, the little things you might otherwise take for granted become all the more important. Early on in Naughty Dog's highly regarded post-apocalypse game The Last of Us, the characters Joel, Ellie, and Tess find themselves exploring a rundown building. Joel announces,
"God damn it, clicker,"
as the player first witnesses the fungal body horror of The Last of Us's answer to zombies. But that's all it is, witnessing. The clicker is already dead, sat against the wall, rigid, its fungal infection now growing into the walls of the building itself. Ellie and Tess then quickly establish the rules of these creatures.
So what, are they blind?
Sort of. They see using sound.
Like bats?
Like bats. If you hear one clicking, you gotta hide. That's how they spot you.
It's interesting that the game establishes the visual horror of the clickers before the auditory one, despite itself declaring to the player, if you hear that sound, you should be terrified. But the choice feels powerful, forcing the player to question what exactly a clicker's click might sound like. Because a click can be so many things: a mechanical keyboard, a mouse, a pen, a light switch. These are all examples of simple, safe, everyday things that make a click sound. But so too does a Geiger counter, or a gun. I've always struggled to understand why the game doesn't decide to live longer in that ambiguity. I mean, I know the player has to encounter one eventually, but it feels like they establish such a horrifying prospect in the idea of not being sure which click is a clicker's click, only to answer that question for you not long after, when later on in the same section, Joel struggles to open the door, the locked handle clicking with each attempt. When he finally busts it open, you, the player, finally encounter a lively, noise-producing clicker for the first time. For years when I was younger, I was confused by the fact that people said clickers make clicking sounds. To me, this didn't sound like I was expecting. This didn't sound like a click of a keyboard or a mouse, a pen or a light switch. This didn't exactly sound like a Geiger counter either. Eventually, I realized the clicker's click isn't so simply defined as any single one of those, but instead, it exists as a cacophony of all of them. Every click could be a clicker. That's horrifying. I mean, think about it. Imagine you're in that world and you hear a clicking noise. It could be harmless, or it could be an impending threat. I think in a way The Last of Us mirrors real life here. Two of the examples I used were Geiger counters and guns, things that click but also represent destruction and violence. But they're not the only things from my list that could represent destruction and violence. A mechanical keyboard and a mouse might seem harmless, but we live in a world where cyber attacks and bullying are a very real problem that ends lives. A pen can be a tool for writing, or a sharp object, a tool for violence. A light switch literally either lights up a room or buries it in darkness. The Last of Us goes on to hammer this point home when Joel is literally killed with a golf club, something that is supposed to represent hobbies and sports and freedom and fun. In The Last of Us, everything is a threat. People, clickers, noises, but the brutal reality is that in our real world, the same can be said. For every harmless tool or force for positivity, there will always be someone seeking to harm others with it, and we usually can't identify who until it's too late. That's terrifying and depressing, but I appreciate the through line T-Lu still reminds us of. That no matter how threatening our world might be, we survive together. The last of the three main games I want to talk about today is a little different. Journey was initially released on the PS3 in 2012, an indie adventure game developed by that game company, the team behind the games Flow and Flower. This isn't as strictly apocalyptic as the other two games we've discussed. There's no zombies, no groups of survivors hiding away from the dangers of the world. No, but in Journey there is no more civilization at all. Outside of you and the potential other players you might encounter throughout your journey, this world is desolate. Uniquely beautiful, but desolate nonetheless. A world populated only by the mysterious ruins of a civilization that is no more. Throughout the entirety of Journey, there is not one line of dialogue, and while there is a semblance of a plot in your quest to reach the top of the mountain, the game feels very much more a story of emotion than words. In my experience, I found Journey's atmosphere eerily similar to that of Death Stranding. There's often a lot more of a weird sense of comfort and nostalgia to Journey, that's for sure, but the ruins and the isolation and the sheer magnitude of desert you need to traverse, it makes you feel this suffocating loneliness. You feel so small. But I'm not sure that's a negative thing here either. It makes you more vulnerable to the ways Journey so desperately wants you to feel, the themes it wants you to engage with. And if you do encounter another player, it makes that interaction feel so much more special. Journey's multiplayer is masterfully done. You can't see usernames or really anything of any value about the players you're playing with. And you can't even really meaningfully interact with each other in any way outside of simply existing in the same space as each other, journeying together. And yet the power of that mechanic is that it makes simply existing at the same time as each other feel like meaningful interaction enough in its own right. Journey, despite being so desolate and arguably lifeless, is a metaphor for life itself. The stages of your journey feel reminiscent of the stages of life. There's the desert and the way you traverse it, similar to childhood exploration and joy. Then there's the way the game drops you into darkness directly after, reminiscent of the darkness and anxiety we often feel when we're thrust into the world of adulthood and responsibility. Then there's the ascent up the mountain, slowing down in the cold, reminiscent of the end of life itself. The game finishes with you exploring a heaven of sorts, an afterlife, a purpose even. Journey essentially uses the backdrop of a dying world to tell a story about the fragility of human life, and the importance that gives to our connections. That brings me to my main point. I'm not sure why we gravitate towards games about the end of the world, but I know what it's like to feel like you're living through it. I mean, it feels like we are constantly talking about it, whether it's climate change, COVID, an asteroid. The end of life as we know it is something I am consistently worried about. I think it comes from some deep insecurity in me that I'm scared the world will end, that I'll die, before I've actually figured myself out and achieved something meaningful. You know, like I'm so terrified of the thought of there being either no one left to remember me, or worse, there being people who could remember me, but don't have a reason to. I struggle a lot, I talk about it a lot, and sometimes in dark moments I have a tendency to feel like existence itself is a pain I'd give anything not to deal with. Anything except never existing to begin with. Existence and the reality that it's temporary is scary. If I think back to lockdown, I remember how low I felt. It was like this sudden reminder that I was small in the grand scheme of things. That the world would one day end, and that my life would one day end, regardless of whether I wanted it to or not. In the face of all that, I felt like nothing matters. No choice I ever make, no thing I do will ever really matter. The things I care about, they don't matter. But then there's Death Stranding, The Last of Us, Journey. Stories about an actual ended world, collapsed societies and civilizations. And true too, in these stories, nothing matters. But there's a difference between nothing matters and nothing matters. Because in these worlds, the fact that nothing matters means everything matters. The little things you take for granted, like the mud you might slip on, the people you trust with your life, the people you spend that life with, they mean everything. You see, if these games have taught me anything, it's that the end of the world, however impending it may be, doesn't have to be the end of my world. Because my world isn't defined by the floating rock I stand on, but by the people and the things that I love most. My world exists within the four walls of my bedroom. Half of it walks on 4 legs, the other half walks on 2. But both halves I live for, and both halves I die for. Both halves matter more to me than any planet or system or society ever could. Nothing matters, and that makes everything matter. It's paradoxical, maybe, but time is a finite resource. Spend it doing the things you love alongside the people you love. The world might end, society might collapse, and the planet might burn to ash. But if your world is founded on love itself, then love is eternal, and so too is your world. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please do consider sticking around and subscribing, and I'd love to hear how you interpret stories about the apocalypse or any other games you feel handle the end of the world in a unique way in the comments down below.